The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen dirt as Cordelia clutched her meager belongings, her breath forming white clouds in the dawn air. She had planned this escape for weeks, slipping away before the Hartwell children woke, before their father returned from his logging expedition. The debt she owed for their mother's burial was crushing her spirit, and staying meant becoming little more than an indentured servant in this harsh mountain village of Pine Hollow. Her boots crunched softly on frost-covered leaves as she crept past the cabin's weathered porch. Freedom beckoned from the winding trail that led to the valley below, where rumor had it a woman could find honest work in the cotton mills. She had saved every penny for months, hiding coins beneath loose floorboards, like a miser hoarding gold, but fate had other plans. "Miss Cordelia?" The voice was barely a whisper, yet it stopped her cold. Little Magnolia Hartwell stood in the doorway, her corn silk hair tangled from sleep, clutching a rag doll against her nightgown. At 7 years old, she possessed an otherworldly intuition that unnerved grown folks. "Where are you going with your satchel?" Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had grown achingly fond of this child over the past year, watching her struggle to mother her younger brothers while their father drank away his grief. The girl's eyes held depths of sorrow that no child should know. I have business in town, sweet pea. Go back to bed." But Magnolia stepped onto the porch, her bare feet seemingly immune to the cold. She reached out with one small, determined hand and grasped Cordelia's wrist. "Please don't let us be alone again," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Papa drinks the devil's brew when he's sad, and little Jasper cries for Mama in his sleep. We need you." The words struck Cordelia like lightning. She had buried her own heart so deep, convinced herself that survival meant hardening against all tender feelings. Yet this child's plea cracked something open inside her chest, longing she had denied since her own family perished in the influenza outbreak 3 winters past. Through the cabin's window, she glimpsed the other Hartwell children, 6-year-old Jasper curled beneath a patchwork quilt, and 4-year-old twins Clementine and Sage sharing a narrow cot. Orphans all, bound together by tragedy and hope. The morning mist began to lift, revealing the village below with its modest church steeple and scatter of log cabins. Pine Hollow wasn't much a settlement carved from wilderness by stubborn souls seeking freedom from the crowded eastern cities. But it was becoming something like home. Cordelia felt her resolve wavering like a candle flame in wind. The sensible thing would be to leave, to save herself from poverty and heartache. But looking into Magnolia's pleading eyes, she realized that sometimes the heart's wisdom surpassed all logic. "Please," the little girl whispered again, and Cordelia knew she was lost. Against every practical instinct, Cordelia set down her satchel. "Just until your papa returns," she heard herself saying, though the words felt like signing away her freedom. Magnolia's face bloomed with relief as she wrapped thin arms around Cordelia's waist. The following weeks tested every ounce of Cordelia's strength. Winter gripped Pine Hollow with merciless cold, and supplies ran dangerously low. She rationed their meager stores of cornmeal and salt pork, making watery soups stretch across multiple meals while the children's hollow cheeks grew sharper with hunger. But it was during these hardest moments that something beautiful began to emerge. The Hartwell cabin, once echoing with grief, slowly filled with tentative laughter. Cordelia taught Magnolia to read from her mother's worn Bible, watching the girl's eyes light up as letters transformed into words into stories of hope and redemption. She carved wooden toys for the twins from fallen branches, and helped young Jasper overcome his fear of the dark by telling him tales of brave knights who conquered shadows. At night, after the children slept, she mended their tattered clothes by candlelight, her fingers working magic with needle and thread. The village began to take notice. When old Mrs. Winthrop fell ill with pneumonia, Cordelia brewed healing teas and sat vigil through long nights. When the Henderson family's roof collapsed under heavy snow, she organized the other women to provide meals and shelter. Her reputation as a healer and helper spread like wildfire through Pine Hollow's close-knit community. It was during one of these mercy missions that she first encountered Donovan McCready. He appeared like a mountain spirit emerging from the forest, leading a pack train loaded with supplies for the struggling settlement. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by premature silver and eyes the color of storm clouds, he possessed the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to wilderness solitude. "You must be the angel the townspeople speak of," he said, helping her lift a bag of grain from his lead horse. His voice carried the rough music of Ireland, softened by years in America but still lyrical enough to make her pulse quicken. Cordelia blushed, unused to such direct attention. "I'm no angel, sir, just a woman doing what needs doing." "Ah, but that's exactly what angels do, isn't it?" His smile transformed his weathered features, revealing a warmth that matched his words. "I'm Donovan McCready. Been hearing tales of your kindness all down the mountain trail." Their conversation was interrupted by little Magnolia tugging at Cordelia's skirt. "Miss Cordelia, Jasper's coughing something fierce again." The spell broke as maternal duty called, but not before Cordelia caught Donovan watching her with unmistakable interest. As she hurried away to tend the sick child, she found herself wondering when she might see the mysterious mountain trader again. Fate answered sooner than expected. A late winter storm trapped Donovan in Pine Hollow for 3 days, and he found reasons to visit the Hartwell cabin with increasing frequency. He brought gifts for the children, peppermint sticks and picture books from distant cities, but his eyes sought Cordelia's face with obvious intent. "You're too generous, Mr. McCready," she protested, watching Clementine and Sage squeal with delight over matching ribbons for their hair. "Call me Donovan, please. And I've been alone on these mountains too long to be anything but generous with good company." He helped her hang wet laundry near the fire, their hands brushing as they worked. Each accidental touch sent sparks racing through her blood. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat by the dying fire sharing stories of their pasts. Donovan spoke of leaving Ireland during the potato famine, of losing his young wife to fever during their first winter in America, of finding solace in the wilderness trade routes that kept him moving between settlements. Cordelia told him about her family's farm back in Virginia, how disease had claimed her parents and siblings, leaving her alone in a world that offered few choices for unmarried women. She spoke of the debt that had driven her west, of her failed attempt to escape Pine Hollow that morning weeks ago. "And what stopped you?" Donovan asked softly, his eyes reflecting firelight. She glanced toward the loft where the children slept peacefully. "A little girl's hand holding mine," she admitted. "Sometimes love finds us when we least expect it, in forms we never imagined." Something shifted in Donovan's expression, a recognition, a shared understanding of heart's healing after great loss. "Aye," he murmured, "sometimes it does." When the storm cleared, Donovan prepared to continue his route, but the farewell felt heavy with unspoken promises. "I'll be back through Pine Hollow come spring," he told her, his large hands gentle as they framed her face. "Will you wait for me, Cordelia?" Before she could answer, he kissed her soft and sweet and full of possibilities. When he pulled away, she saw her own longing reflected in his eyes. "I'll wait," she whispered, surprised by her own certainty. For the first time since her family's death, the future held something besides mere survival. But winter wasn't finished with Pine Hollow yet. 2 days after Donovan's departure, disaster struck in the form of Ezekiel Hartwell stumbling home drunk and violent. His grief transformed into rage by months of whiskey and isolation. The man who confronted Cordelia in his cabin was barely recognizable as the loving father she remembered from before his wife's death. Where are my children? Ezekiel's voice slurred with liquor and fury as he swayed in the cabin doorway. 3 months in the logging camps had hardened his features and broadened his shoulders, but alcohol had weakened his spirit. His clothes reeked of sawdust, sweat, and whiskey. Cordelia positioned herself between him and the loft where the children cowered in frightened silence. "They're sleeping, Mr. Hartwell. You're frightening them." "Frightening them?" He laughed bitterly. "I'm their father. You're nothing but a debt collector's whore taking advantage of my grief." The cruel words struck like physical blows, but Cordelia held her ground. She had faced down wolves and blizzards to protect these children. She wouldn't cower before their broken father. "I've cared for them with love, sir. Fed them, clothed them, kept them safe and warm." "Safe?" Ezekiel stumbled forward, and she caught the dangerous glint in his bloodshot eyes. "Safe from what? From learning that life is nothing but pain and loss? You've made them soft, woman. The world will eat them alive." Above them, little Magnolia began to cry soft, heartbroken sobs that pierced the night air. The sound seemed to fracture something in Ezekiel's chest. He looked up toward his daughter's voice, his face crumpling with anguish. Above them, little Magnolia began to cry soft, heartbroken sobs that pierced the night air. The sound seemed to fracture something in Ezekiel's chest. He looked up toward his daughter's voice, his face crumpling with anguish. "She sounds just like her mother," he whispered, and suddenly he wasn't a threatening drunk but a man drowning in grief. "God help me, I can't do this alone." Cordelia's anger melted into compassion. She had lost family, too. She understood the bottomless well of sorrow that could drive a person to desperate measures. "You don't have to be alone," she said gently. "Let me help you. Let me stay." But Ezekiel's moment of vulnerability passed like a shadow over the moon. His face hardened again, pride and shame warring in his expression. "I won't be charity case. I won't have my children raised by some spinster playing at motherhood. You'll leave come morning, and that's final." The next hours crawled by in tense silence. Cordelia sat vigil by the children's beds, stroking Magnolia's hair as the little girl trembled with fear and confusion. Below, Ezekiel drank himself into a stupor, muttering curses and broken prayers in equal measure. As dawn approached, Cordelia made a decision that would change everything. She quietly gathered the children, wrapping them in warm blankets and leading them out into the gray morning air. If Ezekiel wouldn't let her stay to protect them, she would take them somewhere safe. But where could a penniless woman go with 4 children in the middle of a harsh mountain winter? The answer came in the form of hoofbeats on the frozen trail. Donovan McCready rode into Pine Hollow like an answer to prayer, his pack train laden with early spring supplies. When he saw Cordelia standing in the road with the frightened children clustered around her, his face darkened with protective fury. "What's happened?" he demanded, dismounting swiftly to gather her in his arms. Through tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Cordelia told him everything. Donovan listened with growing anger, his jaw tightening as she described Ezekiel's drunken threats. "Pack whatever you need," he said firmly. "You're all coming with me. I can't just steal another man's children," Cordelia protested, even as her heart leaped at the possibility of escape. The morning sun painted Pine Hollow in shades of gold and amber, but shadows of uncertainty clouded her thoughts. Donovan's expression softened as he knelt to meet Magnolia's eyes. "Would you like to come on an adventure with Miss Cordelia and me?" he asked gently. "We'll see mountains and valleys, maybe even find a place where flowers bloom year-round." The little girl nodded eagerly, her trust absolute. Young Jasper and the twins gathered close, their faces bright with excitement at the prospect of adventure. They had known so little joy in their short lives that even uncertainty seemed preferable to the fear they'd endured. But their escape was short-lived. Ezekiel emerged from the cabin, haggard and wild-eyed but sobered by the sight of his children preparing to leave with strangers. "You won't take my babies," he roared, stumbling toward them with desperate fury. "They're all I have left of her." What followed was a confrontation that drew half the village from their morning chores. Donovan positioned himself protectively in front of Cordelia and the children, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The two men faced each other like wolves contesting territory, while the gathered townspeople formed a circle of tense observers. "These children need love and care," Donovan said evenly. "Not a father who drowns his grief in whiskey while they go hungry. You don't know what I've sacrificed." Ezekiel's voice cracked with anguish. "I worked myself near to death in those lumber camps to pay off debts, to give them a future. Everything I do is for them." It was old Mrs. Winthrop who stepped forward to break the deadlock. Leaning heavily on her walking stick, the village matriarch fixed both men with a stern glare. "Fighting over these children like their property won't solve anything. What matters is what's best for them." She turned to address the crowd. "We've all watched Cordelia care for the Hartwell young ones through the hardest winter in memory. She's fed them when they were hungry, comforted them when they cried, taught them lessons their mother would be proud of. That's not charity, that's love." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered villagers. Cordelia felt warmth bloom in her chest as neighbors she had helped stepped forward to speak on her behalf. The blacksmith praised her kindness to his injured son. The pastor's wife recalled how Cordelia had organized food for flood victims. One by one, they testified to her character and compassion. But it was little Magnolia who provided the moment that changed everything. Breaking away from the group, she ran to her father and threw her arms around his legs. "Papa, we love you," she said simply. "But we love Miss Cordelia too. Why can't we all be a family together?" The child's innocent wisdom struck the crowd. Silent, Ezekiel looked down at his daughter's upturned face, then at his other children watching him with desperate hope. For the first time in months, he seemed to truly see them, not as burdens or painful reminders of loss, but as precious lives depending on him for guidance. When he raised his eyes to meet Cordelia's gaze, she saw the broken man beginning to remember who he used to be. "I've been a poor excuse for a father," Ezekiel admitted, his voice rough with emotion. The admission seemed to cost him greatly, pride warring with truth in his weathered features. "When Martha died, I felt like my heart was torn from my chest. I thought if I could just work hard enough, earn enough money, I could somehow make up for failing her." Cordelia felt her anger softening into understanding. She had known Martha Hartwell, a gentle woman with laughing eyes and infinite patience for her growing brood. Her death from childbed fever had devastated not just Ezekiel, but the entire community. "Martha wouldn't want you destroying yourself with guilt," Cordelia said quietly. "She'd want you to live, to love these children, and let them love you in return." The words hung in the crisp morning air as Ezekiel struggled with demons only he could see. Around them, the village held its collective breath, sensing they were witnessing a soul's battle for redemption. It was Donovan who broke the silence with an unexpected proposal. "There's a valley about 2 days' ride south of here," he said thoughtfully. "Good land, fresh water. Close enough to trade routes for supplies, but far enough from towns to offer peace. I've been thinking of settling down, maybe building a homestead." He looked meaningfully at Cordelia, then at Ezekiel. "Seems to me these children could use both a father who's learned to heal his heart and a mother who already knows how to nurture theirs. And maybe we could all learn something about becoming a family." The proposal was radical: a widowed trader, a grieving father, an unmarried woman, and 4 orphan children forming an unconventional household. In more civilized places, such arrangements would scandalize proper society. But Pine Hollow had always been a place where survival mattered more than convention. Ezekiel studied Donovan with new respect. "You'd do that? Share your land with a man who just threatened you?" "I've been alone too long," Donovan replied simply. "And these children, they deserve every chance at happiness we can give them." Over the following days, the unusual arrangement began to take shape. Ezekiel, finally sober and committed to staying that way, threw himself into preparing for the move with the desperate energy of a man seeking redemption. He sold what few possessions remained and settled his debts, while Donovan arranged for supplies and transportation. Cordelia found herself caught between hope and fear. The prospect of building a new life with people she had come to love filled her with joy, but old wounds made trust difficult. Could Ezekiel truly overcome his demons? Could she open her heart to Donovan's love while navigating the complexities of their unusual family structure? Her answer came during their last evening in Pine Hollow. As she tucked the children into bed for the final time in the cabin that had become their temporary home, little Magnolia looked up with eyes full of wisdom. "Miss Cordelia," the child whispered, "are you scared about tomorrow?" "A little," Cordelia admitted. "Big changes can be frightening, even when they're good changes." Magnolia nodded solemnly. "Mama used to say that love is the only thing that makes us brave enough to keep trying. She said God puts people in our path exactly when we need them most." The child's words echoed in Cordelia's heart as she stepped outside to find Donovan waiting on the porch, his face bathed in moonlight. 6 months later, the valley Donovan had promised proved even more beautiful than his words had painted. Rolling meadows dotted with wildflowers stretched between protective mountain ridges, while a clear creek provided fresh water and the music of running water. They had built not one homestead but 3: Ezekiel's cabin for him and the children, Cordelia's smaller dwelling nearby where she could maintain propriety while remaining close enough to help with daily needs, and Donovan's sturdy home positioned to oversee both. The arrangement had tested them all. There were difficult days when Ezekiel battled his grief and the temptation to drink, when the children struggled with nightmares and the lingering fear of abandonment, when Cordelia wondered if she had been foolish to tie her fate to such complicated circumstances. But there were far more days filled with laughter and small miracles. Ezekiel proved himself a devoted father once his heart began healing, teaching his sons to fish and hunt while helping his daughters learn the domestic arts their mother would have shared. The children bloomed like flowers after rain, their faces growing round with good food and their eyes bright with security. And slowly, carefully, Donovan courted Cordelia with the patience of a man who understood that lasting love couldn't be rushed. He brought her wildflowers from mountain meadows and hand-carved combs for her hair. He listened to her dreams and fears during long evening walks, never pressing for more than she was ready to give. The moment when everything changed came on a warm autumn evening during harvest celebration. The entire makeshift family had spent the day gathering apples and preparing preserves for winter, their laughter echoing across the valley like music. As twilight painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Donovan took Cordelia's hand and led her to the creek bank where they could speak privately. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice unusually nervous. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple ring carved from mountain laurel wood, beautiful in its humble craftsmanship. "Cordelia, you've already shown these children more love than many mothers give their own. You've brought peace to a broken man's heart and taught us all what family truly means." He dropped to one knee beside the singing water, his eyes never leaving her face. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and help you love them for the rest of our days?" Through tears of joy, Cordelia saw their entire chosen family watching from the cabin porch, Ezekiel nodding his approval, the children bouncing with excitement as they realized what was happening. Little Magnolia broke away from the group and ran toward them, her face glowing with happiness. "Say yes, Miss Cordelia," the little girl called out. "Say yes so we can really be a family forever." As Donovan slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, Cordelia felt the last walls around her heart crumble away. This wasn't the life she had planned or the family she had imagined, but it was perfect in its imperfection, built on loss and found love, on second chances and the courage to keep believing in tomorrow. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, so the children could hear, "Yes, with all my heart." Their wedding took place the following spring, with the entire valley in bloom and their chosen family as witnesses. As Donovan kissed his bride beneath the apple trees they had planted together, little Magnolia's voice rose clear and sweet above the celebration. "Please don't let us be alone again," she had begged that winter morning when Cordelia tried to leave quietly. Looking around at the faces of the people who had become her world, Cordelia knew with absolute certainty that none of them would ever be alone again.